Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's Alex at the University of Memphis Counseling Center. Today, my colleague Ray Sean and I are going to be covering anxiety, what it is, what the difference between anxiety and worry is, typical causes of anxiety, associated symptoms, how to identify them, and we're also going to be discussing some coping skills for various types of anxiety and specifically related to the coronavirus, the unexpected changes that we're all having to make, and the difficulties navigating through uncertainty and an extremely tough situation. So let's start off by understanding exactly what anxiety is. The American Psychological Association defines anxiety as an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. It could also look like difficulty breathing, increased muscle tension, those types of things. Anxiety is your body's natural response to stress. It's feelings of fear or apprehension about what's to come. And anxiety is normal and often a healthy emotion. However, it can become overwhelming when we start experiencing excessive fear, excessive apprehension, excessive worry, or excessive nervousness. It's important to note that there is a difference between anxiety and worry, although oftentimes people do use the terms interchangeably. They are very different psychological states. Although both are associated with a general sense of concern and disquiet, how we experience them is quite different. So we are going to discuss a few of the differences between anxiety and worry. One is that we tend to experience worry more in our heads and anxiety more physiologically or in our bodies. Worry tends to be more focused on thoughts in our heads, while anxiety is more what we call visceral, in that we feel it throughout our bodies. So that goes back to what we were discussing a minute ago about increased blood pressure, increased muscle tension, difficulty breathing. So another way that they're different is that worry tends to be specific, while anxiety is more diffuse. So we worry about getting to the airport on time, but we feel anxious about flying in general. Worry is also verbally focused, while anxiety includes verbal thoughts and mental imagery. So the difference is very important, as emotional mental images, such as those associated with anxiety, provoke a much greater cardiovascular response than emotional verbal thoughts, such as those associated with worry. This is another reason why we experience anxiety throughout our bodies and not just in our heads. Worry often triggers problem solving, but anxiety doesn't. Worry can lead us to think about solutions and strategies for dealing with a given situation. Anxiety is much more like a hamster wheel that spins us around and around but doesn't lead us to any productive solutions. It's anxiety's more diffuse or abstract nature that makes it difficult to find a solution for or to problem solve for. Worry creates fairly mild emotional distress, while anxiety can create severe emotional distress. Anxiety is simply much more powerful and causes a much more disruptive and problematic emotional state than worry does. So worry, as you can see, is caused by more realistic concerns than anxiety. If you're concerned about getting fired because you didn't do so well on a project at work, or you're concerned about failing a test because you didn't study enough, these things are worry. If you're concerned about getting fired because your boss didn't ask about your child's piano recital, or you're concerned about failing a test because you have an overarching fear of failure, these things tend to be more anxiety producing. So, with these examples, you can see that worry is much more easily controlled than anxiety tends to be. So, problem solving and thinking through strategies to deal with the cause of the worry can diminish it greatly. However, we have much less control over our anxiety, and it's much harder to talk ourselves out of or find a solution or problem solve to decrease that anxiety. Worry tends to also be more of a temporary state, while anxiety and the physiological symptoms that we experience because of our anxiety tends to linger a bit longer. Once we resolve the issue that we're worried about, our worry will diminish or disappear completely. Anxiety stays around for a lot longer period of time, even jumping from one focus to another. One week we can feel anxious about work, then about our health, then about our kids, those types of things. So as you can see, it's way less practical, way less controllable. We aren't able to problem solve and find solutions for our anxiety the way we are for our worry. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Rayshawn. He's going to talk about typical causes and triggers of anxiety, associated symptoms, how to identify them, and also he's going to discuss some coping skills and coping strategies and give some resources on managing anxiety.
Guys, it's me again. Seeing as how Alex discussed with you guys anxiety, some common misconceptions and just some general education about what anxiety is, I want to go ahead and talk to you guys about like what some of those anxiety triggers may look like. We talk a lot about anxiety. We all kind of have an understanding of what anxiety is, but sometimes I think we're lost on what triggers that anxiety. And I think like, understanding what your personal triggers are to anxiety, understanding like what makes you tick, like what gets you kind of keyed up. I think that's often like the first step in really overcoming it, because if you can understand it, if you can recognize that it's there, if you can see the signs, you can then begin to address them. Like that's where the real work comes into play. So I just want to go ahead and take this time to talk to you guys a bit about some triggers. I'm going to go through about 11 of them. These are like some of the most common triggers associated with anxiety. Number one being health issues, understanding that someone, either yourself or someone in your family, may come across, some type of chronic illness. This type of trigger can be powerful because it brings about like immediate personal feelings, and like it produces that immediate reaction. And you can help to reduce those feelings by, talking to health professionals, being proactive, staying engaged with your doctor, talking to a therapist could also be useful. Just for some ways to really manage some of those emotions that you may be experiencing around your diagnosis or around your family member's diagnosis. But health issues is typically the number one trigger for anxiety. Followed, of course, would be medications. Some certain medications can also work to trigger anxiety just because the active ingredients, like they sometimes lead you to feel uneasy or unwell. Some of those medicines that may trigger anxiety could be birth control pills. It could be cough and congestion medications. It could be weight loss medications. And if you're taking any of these medications and you're feeling, these symptoms, if you're feeling weird, I'll get into those symptoms in a bit. But if you start to feel like those anxious symptoms, it's good to talk to your doctor about it. Maybe look for an alternative that may not trigger those anxiety or may not worsen those symptoms. Caffeine is another one that can bring about that anxiety. So you wake up, you're thinking you're getting a good cup of Joe, but of course, like in 2010, there was a study that was conducted which showed that it can really work to induce the effects of anxiety. The effects of caffeine really work to make us more anxious. I'm not a coffee drinker, so if you are a coffee drinker, maybe you could speak more to that, but that's just out of my realm. But I would imagine that it does bring about that anxiety. Maybe that's why I stay off of it. I don't know. But yeah, cutting back on caffeine or substituting for a decaf coffee could be definitely helpful. There's also tea options that could give you that same feel of caffeine without the coffee vibe kind of deal. So yeah, definitely being mindful of like how you're feeling after those things as well. Skipping meals can bring about anxiety. You definitely don't want to skip meals. Balanced meals are important. Like it leads to our blood sugar. Without If we have low blood sugar, we could feel jittery. We could feel, you know, down. It just brings about that extra trigger of anxiety. And not to mention, like, it brings you energy, it brings you nutrients, and those energy and nutrients can also work to combat anxiety. So really aim for 3 meals a day. I know that's like very elementary school to say, but you'd be surprised how many people like go by thinking that they can have one meal and that's good to go. Food really does affect your mood, and I'll get into that a bit more later. Negative thinking is also a trigger for anxiety. Your mind controls a lot of what your body does and a lot of how your body feels. So the battle really starts up here. You really got to be able to identify like those self-deprecating thoughts. What purpose are they serving? Try to replace them with something more negative. Refocus your language, refocus your feelings. um, you know Working with a therapist could also be incredibly helpful. They can really work with you on engaging in more self-affirming statements, or really redirecting those negative thoughts, seeing what parts of those messages are true, what parts aren't valuable, those sorts of things. Number six would be financial concerns. That can all, obviously that triggers anxiety. We all want to have enough money to cover our bills. We want to have enough money to live comfortably. But learning how to manage those triggers may also require some help as well. It may need a financial advisor. Learning about how to really invest your money, make the best out of your dollar. So that way it could, creating a savings, those sorts of things, like working with a financial advisor could be really helpful. But we know that money is stressful. Money brings about anxiety as well, especially for us college students. Parties and social events, of course, bring anxiety. And if it's a struggle for you to be in a room full of strangers, or to be in a room full of people who are turning up, having fun, vibing out, um, it's weird. Like, it's strange. Like, small talk is awkward. Like, sometimes we don't want to interact with people we don't know. Sometimes people are experiencing social anxiety. They have those concerns of being like scrutinized or over evaluated by everyone that they're around, or feeling like everyone's looking at them, those sorts of things. If this is something that you're dealing with, some things that could really help to address that is, taking a friend with you to a party, or maybe practicing what you'll say to people when you meet them. There's like YouTube videos and things that talk about like how to engage in small talk. I know because I've used them. I'm not the best at small talk. I'm trying to improve myself. Um, but yeah, it's really important to like work on those things as well. Conflict, of course, is a really huge anxiety-inducing aspect. Relationship problems, arguments, disagreements, like they all can trigger that anxiety. Um, if you're one person who is like, if you're someone who is often triggered by conflict, working on some conflict resolution strategies. It's good to talk to a therapist about that as well. Manage some of the feelings that are associated with those conflicts, or what arises for you when you are feeling as if it's time for conflict. Working with a therapist to talk about how to address those, how to manage those, could be really helpful. Stress is, of course, I don't even have to say it. Traffic jams, running late to class, feeling like you said the wrong thing on a date. Those are all sorts of things that can definitely bring about anxiety. Not getting enough sleep, that leads to stress. Treating and preventing stress often requires like those coping mechanisms. So I'll definitely talk to you guys more about coping mechanisms, as I mentioned. But a therapist and counselor, they could definitely help you with those things, especially when you're feeling like overwhelmed. If that stress starts to feel a bit too problematic, it's always good to go and get some help. Number 10, being public events or performances. Public speaking is extremely anxiety inducing. Anytime I have to get on here and do a video, I'm filled with anxiety, just because I'm concerned that I may say the wrong thing, or I may say something, I may fumble across my words, or what have you. But again, it's good to kind of talk to a therapist about those things, figure out how we can get you more comfortable in those settings, practicing in front of a mirror, practicing with friends, practicing with colleagues, what have you, family members. It's always good to, incorporate a support system. I think support systems are, in my opinion, support systems are one of the best ways to address that anxiety. And then number 11, those personal triggers. Whatever those personal triggers may be, like, it could be a smell, it could be a song, it could be a place, it could be seeing an ex post on social media, whatever that trigger is, it's good to be able to identify. At the same time, though, sometimes can be difficult to identify what those triggers are if you don't know like what a trigger is. So again, working with a professional to figure out what my triggers are, how can I address them, you know, yeah, what are my triggers? How can I address them? How can I, identify them when they come up? What are some good coping skills for me to, you know, implement when I'm feeling kind of stressed out, when I'm feeling anxious? I think those are great ways to kind of, get the conversation, get the ball rolling. And then, just to talk about some symptoms. I know I mentioned symptoms a bunch of times as I was giving that kind of spiel, but, thinking about those symptoms, some of the common symptoms associated with anxiety are that muscle pain and tension, feeling really tight in your body, feeling sleep deprived, not getting enough sleep, not being able to stay asleep, not being able to fall asleep, tightness around your body, especially the head, neck, jaw area. I know for me, when I'm feeling anxious, I get like a Lego hand kind of thing, like it gets like really tight. Um, my neck kind of gets warm, my jaw may clench up, and that's how I know that it's time for me to start really engaging in some of those coping strategies that I'm going to talk to you guys about. You might feel like a shake, a tremble. You may feel as dizzy. You might feel excessively worrying about something, restless, keyed up, on edge. Like these are all just some typical things that are associated with anxiety. Of course, like symptoms of anxiety aren't limited to these symptoms, but these are just some of the most common ones. Headaches, um, you know, feeling guilty, extremely fast heartbeat. And I think, if these are some of the symptoms that you may feel when you're feeling anxious, it's good to kind of key in on those. Identifying those triggers may take time, but of course, identifying those symptoms may take time, but of course, it comes with work. Like it comes with the effort, it comes with the territory, it comes with practice, patience, being patient with yourself. Um, it's hard. Like it's hard to really identify something when we've spent our whole lives kind of ignoring it or kind of pretending that it wasn't there. So be patient with yourself during this time. It's a very unique experience for sure to understand like what your symptoms are and then begin to address them. So how do we then address those symptoms? Actually, before we go into addressing symptoms, I want to talk about like how to identify triggers. Since I talked about triggers first, I want to go ahead and keep it with triggers. So how do we identify triggers? Some 3 tips for identifying triggers. You could start a journal. Write down when your anxiety is noticeable. Write down what's going on. Write down what some of the symptoms were. Writing down, who was there, what was going on, like all those sorts of things. Because then you can get an idea of what situations, what actions, what songs, places, what brings you anxiety, those sorts of things. Work with a therapist. Some anxiety triggers could be very difficult to identify, as I talked about, but having a specialist who specializes in mental health training, they'll be able to talk to you about how therapy can be effective, how journaling can be effective, how other methods can be used to identify those triggers. It's really good to like work with someone who is very versed in that realm. Be honest with yourself. Anxiety can cause negative thoughts. It can cause poor self-assessment. It can cause, self-deprecating thoughts, which can in turn bring about those anxious reactions. And as I mentioned before, it's good to just be patient with yourself. Be willing to explore like how things affect you. Be willing to explore what those things are and like how are we going to address them in the future. Okay, so back to the symptoms. How do we cope with symptoms? I'm going to give you guys a couple things. So first, I want to talk about how to like quickly address anxiety. I'll give you 5 tips for quickly addressing it, and then I'm going to give you 6 tips for like addressing long-term anxiety. So if anxiety in the moment, of course, question your thought pattern. If you're having negative thoughts, if you're having those self-harmful thoughts, self-deprecating thoughts, understanding like the severity of the situation, challenge yourself, ask yourself, is it true? And that way you can begin to take back control. For example, if I have a negative thought that if I walk past this music building, I'm going to get hit in the head with a piano. Like I know that there's no truth to that. I know that that's just an extremely anxious thought. I mean, if I was like Wile E. Coyote or something, it could be definitely feasible, possible. But in the grand scheme of things, like I'm probably not going to get hit in the head with the piano. So like that would be something, not necessarily a negative thought about myself, but a negative thought about like what may happen to me. So being aware of that is definitely a good thing. Questioning like, am I actually going to get hit in the head with the piano? Probably not. Am I a stupid person? Probably not. Am I Am I hateful? No, I just probably did something that wasn't as acceptable. Really working through those things, taking control of your own thoughts. Practice that focused deep breathing. We have some really good videos about grounding techniques. We have some good videos about breathing techniques. Um, there's a video, the first video of our workshop series that since we started this workshop series, Victoria does a great job talking about breathing techniques. One of my favorite techniques is, which she talks about in there as well, is the 478 breathing method. So it's just a matter of inhaling, taking a deep breath for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 4. Holding it for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 7. And exhaling for 8 seconds. 1, 2, 8. And it's good to do that for maybe about 5 minutes or so, or until you start to feel yourself calm down in the moment. Another one is use of aromatherapy, oil, incense, candle. I love to get candles burning. I love lavender, my chamomile, my sandalwood, like anything that's soothing. We can't really take trips to Bath and Body Works right now, but you can order something from Bath and Body Works. Um, Go for a walk, do 15 minutes of yoga. I know sometimes that meditation can be a little difficult, especially if it's hard to kind of sit and focus for some people. So try yoga. I know everybody's got a downward dog in their arsenal. Write down your thoughts. Number 5, write down those thoughts. Really see like what's making you anxious. Try to work to like identify and make it a little less daunting for you. Um, Understanding like how often are you experiencing anxiety. If it's more sporadic, then you may want to really seek out some help, talk to a friend about it, talk to a professor, talk to a therapist. Really working to figure out like how can we manage these thoughts and symptoms of anxiety. And then just 6 long-term strategies for coping with anxiety. Identifying and learning how to manage your triggers. Sometimes they can be obvious, like for example, coughing, drinking alcohol, smoking. But other times they can be less obvious. Like I don't really understand why my heart is beating fast. Like I don't even recognize that my heart is beating fast right now. I don't realize that that's causing me to have like a delayed thought process or a shift down in my thinking. So it takes some time, like just being patient with yourself. Maybe working with a therapist who specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy, other words, also known as CBT. This can help you to learn some different ways of thinking about and reacting to anxiety causing situations. I think sometimes a therapist can also help to, work with you on changing those thought patterns before like the behaviors begin to spiral out of control. Do a daily routine meditation. I know I just mentioned that meditation may be difficult. So if it is difficult, try some yoga. You may want to change your diet up a bit. Of course, we know diet has a lot to play with our mental health. Taking more supplements, lemon balm, omega-3 fatty acids, green tea, valerian root, those sorts of things. Um, Surprisingly enough, dark chocolate is great for anxiety, but it's got to be in some moderation for sure. Really working to keep your mind and body healthy, doing some exercising, eating balanced meals, getting enough sleep, staying connected with people who are also working to stay healthy, who are also working to identify and manage their anxiety, because then you guys can work together with that. If it's something that's extremely out of hand, even talking to a doctor, primary care physician, or a therapist about referring you to someone who could talk about medications with you. Depending on the symptoms, like medication management could be very helpful for managing that anxiety. And then just another takeaway about anxiety. I think sometimes we want to get rid of anxiety. Sometimes anxiety can teach us things. It can teach us what we're passionate about. It can teach us what our concerns are. It can teach us what we're worried about. Not all anxiety is bad. Anxiety is extremely common, but the chronic feelings of worry are not. Again, I'll say that. I'll say that again. Anxiety, the occasional feelings of anxiety are extremely common. It's okay to be anxious. Your favorite future psychologist gets anxious. It's perfectly fine. But again, that dread, that ruminating, that brooding, that intense fear, like these are not common, and that may lead you to want to get some help, from some professional help. See a therapist. I can't say enough. Like therapy is one of the best things that you may experience. If you haven't tried it, get a therapist. Telehealth is available during this time. You could definitely consult the counseling center. Our consult phone is often open. Our consult phone is always open. Um, And there's nothing wrong with getting help. The good news is that anxiety is highly treatable. Many people experience anxiety. Almost everyone experiences anxiety. But if it's impeding on your day to day life, then you may want to get some assistance just to deal with that. A mental health specialist, they could work with you on a treatment plan, on some goals to really help you to get that anxiety down. Um, yeah, so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn you guys back over to Alex. She's going to talk to you about some specific coping strategies for dealing with, this difficult time while we are self quarantining. Um, really specific to like dealing with managing coronavirus anxiety. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Welcome back. We are going to spend a few minutes talking about specific coping skills in light of COVID 19 and how our anxiety can show up during times of change we're unprepared for, times of uncertainty, times of being scared and fearful about what's going on, what's to come, what we're going to be faced with, and what we're currently dealing with. So, as we know, right now is a really scary time for a lot of people, for most people. We have been shaken out of our standard routines from going to work, going to school, how we gather with our communities, with our families, with our friends. So many of our standard ways of living and our daily routines are disrupted right now. And because of that, as a nation, we're experiencing an increase in anxiety. The first thing I do want to say is that you're not alone in this anxiety, in this fear, in this depression. The world has changed radically in a very, very short amount of time because of COVID 19. And change can feel scary, it can feel uncomfortable and overwhelming, especially when the change was unexpected and we're unprepared and things right now do not feel normal. So, in this state and phase of being or feeling out of control, what are some ways that we can gain some control and focus on controlling what we can control? Before we start getting into some of the specific coping skills for anxiety during this uncertain and really difficult time, I think it's important to talk about keeping things in perspective. Take a deep breath. Remind yourself that most people who contract COVID 19 will only experience mild symptoms. Work is being done to help people who may be more vulnerable to the coronavirus, such as senior citizens and those with underlying health conditions. And as more coverage increases, it's important to take the necessary precautions to keep your family and loved ones healthy. For the parents out there who are personally struggling with anxiety or stress, or who are finding it difficult to have discussions about COVID 19 with your children, I think it's important to communicate with your children if they are age appropriate about the coronavirus and the news coverage on the coronavirus. Parents can also help to alleviate distress by focusing on children's routines, on schedules, on getting homework done, those types of things. And just keep in mind that children are always observing your behaviors and your emotions for cues on how to manage their own feelings, and especially during this time. You may want to think about limiting how much media they consume and help keep some of their anxiety at bay by not exposing them to a lot of coverage about the virus. It could be helpful to explain to them that there are only a few news sources that you rely on for this information, and if it's not one of those news sources, we can't rely on that information. That's not a reputable source. Those types of things. So when we're talking about establishing routines and how important routines are, it's important to remember that we're creatures of habit and creatures of anxiety. And when our habits get disturbed and our routines get disturbed, it's important to create a new structure or a new normal for yourself when norms like school and work and communication with your community or your friends or your family are disturbed, which is what's happening right now. Routines really help you manage your emotional and mental health by making sure that you have some good routines in place, like exercise, connection, and putting limits on your news consumption. You can maintain some semblance of groundedness. And when we're faced with an increase in anxiety, remaining grounded in a routine is imperative. Even though we're all dealing with some unanswered questions and a lot of uncertainty about our current state and our future state, making new routines and creating a new structure is going to be essential in decreasing anxiety and stress throughout an extremely stressful time. When we're talking about making new routines, creating a different structure, that can be a really daunting, difficult task. So, we're going to look at ways to create a new routine and also how to stick to that routine. How these routines are going to help us and how we can adjust to a new normal, which is exactly what a large majority of us are having to do right now. So, build your routine around movement. Exercise is great for combating anxiety. You can do it inside or outside as long as you're not around others. This kind of meets two self care moves in a day as well. And staying active creates a positive new habit for yourself. Exercise can help you manage stress, get your body moving if you're able. I'm not talking about going out and running a marathon every morning, more like light stretching, midday dancing around your home, move around and take a short walk in your neighborhood or community. These are all things that are going to be helpful in improving your mood. Also, build a routine around cooking. So many of us aren't able to go out to a restaurant and dine in and enjoy that experience right now. And so many of us are choosing to instead cook in our homes every night. And so, creating a routine around cooking is a really great way to gain a sense of routine. And cooking really requires your full and constant attention. It's a great distraction from anxiety. You can try out new recipes. It's a great way to keep your body nourished, both physically and mentally. And if you're finding that you're still getting distracted while you're cooking, maybe implementing some mindfulness during your cooking through a guided mindfulness activity or check out our, grounding techniques video that has some really great mindfulness activities in it as well. It could be a really good way to stay present and in the moment, distract yourself from everything else, and decrease your anxiety. So, we spent some time talking about controlling things that we can control. I think it's important to touch on accepting things that we can't control, things that we can't change. It's equally as important to recognize that some things just simply are out of our control during this time, whether we like that or not. For issues you can't really control or change, you may not be able to talk yourself out of worrying about the health of your elderly parents, but you can consider strategies for how you'll handle these unavoidable emotions and prevent them from overwhelming you. We all know, the list of healthy coping mechanisms and mindfulness, exercise, journaling, and so on are great ways to decrease anxiety and depression. And these are great ways of maintaining a calmness if they work for you. Being reminded to follow these practices just adds more stress for some people, though. Maybe you prefer managing your emotions by taking a brief break from your worries in the form of a book or a game or binge watching a Netflix TV show, or you like to stress bake, scream into a pillow. It really doesn't matter what you do so long as you actively do something that helps you both feel and also function better. So, we've touched on mindfulness a little bit, but to get a bit more in depth, creating a mindfulness routine as part of this new normal is a really great way to relieve anxiety. Incorporate some mindfulness breathing by practicing some breath work, utilize a guided mindfulness activity through an app, or reference our Mindfulness Monday videos that we've put out and will continue to put out for the remainder of the semester. Find a moment of stillness throughout each of your days, and these activities will help calm your sympathetic nervous system. It'll help you decrease any physiological symptoms you're experiencing and ultimately decrease overall stress and anxiety that you're experiencing throughout the day. Also, when we're creating new routines, we don't want to leave out connection. To avoid falling into old habits, we want to make sure that we have healthy routines in place that will keep us interacting with others and attending to our moods. The current state of everything can make connection to friends and family and loved ones extremely difficult, but utilize technology to continue reaching out to trusted people in your support system. If you feel alone, reach out. It helps you exercise compassion. It's valuable during this time of immense change. Research shows that social connections improve your overall well being. They help you build self esteem and even strengthen your immune system. So it's important to continue intentionally scheduling moments of connection throughout your day. This can look like FaceTime. This can look like Zoom video chats with your group of friends. This can look like phone dates, a text check-in, anything that you can do that makes reaching out a daily goal will help you alleviate some of the stress and anxiety that comes with our current state. Another way to decrease some of the overwhelming emotions that we're feeling right now during COVID-19 and the spread of the coronavirus and quarantine and isolation is to take some time to notice the small joys from your days. This is so helpful in maintaining your mental health. This could be small acts of self-love, your morning cup of coffee or tea, lighting a candle with a relaxing scent, checking in on your plants, doing your skincare routine. Making these small joys a daily routine will help you reduce overall stress and anxiety, and it also contributes positively to your mental health and overall well-being. Another thing to consider incorporating in your new routine is music. No matter if you're working from home, you're homeschooling, you're participating in online classes, incorporate a soundtrack for your day. Build your new routines around the music you listen to. Select different genres of music or various soundtracks for different daily tasks. A work soundtrack, a school soundtrack, a bedtime soundtrack. Create a playlist. And then also incorporating some connection, share your playlist with others. And maybe on your video chats, y'all can listen to the playlist. Things like that. These things are going to be so important to your overall well being and your overall new daily normal. It's really important also to set reminders for these new routines. Once you've established your new normal, it's all about remembering to do it. As with any habit, we have to practice and practice and practice. So, remembering to follow your new routine is one of the most difficult things about creating a new structure. This really can look like setting alerts on your phone, leaving sticky notes around, setting alarms on your calendar, online. So if you're working or doing schoolwork, you have a thing that pops up, practice breathing, take a breath break, take a moment of stillness. These types of things for mindfulness, or go for a walk, do some stretching. Those things can be real game changers in all of this, and incorporating those into your daily routine is going to be essential in healthy mental health and overall well-being. So when we're looking at how to remind yourself to adhere to this new routine, anything that will help you stay on track, do it. And on the flip side of that, if you do forget a part of your new routine, it can be a really great opportunity to practice some self-compassion. And self-compassion can be so important, especially during a really difficult time like we're experiencing now. Keep in mind that it's okay if these routines need to shift as you shift. As humans, we're constantly growing and changing and learning, and being able to adapt to that is just one of the many ways you can show up for yourself in the midst of all of this uncertainty. So, we've talked about controlling what we can control, accepting what we can't control, the importance of creating new structure and new routine during this time of unpredictability and unexpected change. And so I want to take a few minutes to talk about news consumption. So when you're looking at finding the news about the coronavirus, we want to make sure that we're getting it from trusted, reputable resources and not just whatever there is on the internet. We want to fact check whatever we see. We want to make sure that these things are coming from reputable sources. So the Center for Disease Control, the World Health Organization, you want to stick to major media for this information. Get information from professionals. They are doing their best to gather responsible and accurate information, and not all media sites are doing that right now, unfortunately. So by doing this, you're going to be protected from irresponsible media, from people using opportunity to inflame racial or ethnic hatred, from rumor mongers, from people trying to profit off of this worldwide pandemic. Just keep in mind that your news has to come from trusted sources of information. We're going to be including those links below So if you want to check those out and maybe put them on your regular list of news sources in replacement, that would be awesome. Um, Another thing to think about is that, you know, right now social media is crazy with all of this information. So it could be a good idea to start limiting our social media intake for the time being. If your newsfeed is anything like mine, information and misinformation is everywhere. So, for that reason, it's a really good idea to set some boundaries around how much you're consuming. You can do this by deciding in advance what times you're going to allow yourself to check your social media and also for how long. You could even set a timer to keep yourself honest. Placing boundaries around social media consumption as well as news consumption is going to be imperative for your mental health and overall well being. This time can feel so overwhelming. Our anxiety and our fear and our worry and our apprehension, it can feel so overwhelming. If you feel exhausted with your efforts to manage your anxiety and your stress, if you feel burnt out on trying to come up with ways to alleviate anxiety, please reach out and seek professional help. We all can feel overwhelmed sometimes with nervousness, with a lingering sadness, or other prolonged reactions that adversely affect our job performance, our school performance, our interpersonal relationships. And if that's the case for you, it could be a good idea to seek help with a trained professional. And, you can reach out to the Student Counseling Center on campus. We are happy to look at other ways to find or look at other ways to manage your anxiety, manage adversity. You can find our contact information at memphis.edu/counseling. We're also going to, again, include some resources below, so make sure to check those out, check those reputable news sources out, check those articles about reducing anxiety out, and hopefully some portion of this video has been helpful to you. Our hope is that you're able to utilize some of these coping mechanisms, maybe understand what you're feeling right now, understand that it's normal, understand how to manage all of this during the coronavirus epidemic. But if all of this wasn't enough, then please reach out to us. Again, memphis.edu/counseling center.